Ugh, these niches are close. Clever guy. One of the biggest challenges you're going to have as a newbie content creator is choosing your niche, and it is a huge decision. So today we're going to be talking about exactly what you can do to make sure you choose the right niche for you. And if you got the movie reference, leave a comment. So I've been playing around with building blogs and YouTube channels for quite a few years now. So I've gone through the process many times. And I feel that there are three main phases you need to go through to select a niche. So we're going to be talking about those today. Now, the first phase is what I call brainstorming a niche. Now, one of the problems you might have if you're new to this is if you're following a particular YouTube channel or perhaps following a particular course, you're going to kind of gravitate to niches within that umbrella. What I mean by that is that certain people have a certain way of thinking, and if you don't know better, you're going to think those are the only kind of niches that actually work. But the truth is, nearly anything could be a good niche and actually end up making you money. So all you want to do right now is just get as many ideas down on paper as you can so that you can run them through the little system we're going to talk about in the next phase. So think about your hobbies. What do you like to do? Think about your job. Perhaps that's something that you can develop. What are your friends into at the moment? What have your family been talking about? How about you look at your internet search history? What issues have you had over the last year and how did you solve them? Have a look around your house right now. What kind of objects do you own? What services do you use on a regular basis? People are literally making money in the strangest of niches. All you've got to do is just think about it. And of course, if you're struggling, there are loads and loads of lists of niches online that you can just Google. And if you're a Project 24 member, there's a helpful list that's given to you to give you some ideas. You can also check Facebook groups, Reddit, Quora. All these kind of things can help you come up with ideas for niches. So once you've got a list of a couple of ideas for niches, what you want to do now is kind of run them through a filter to see if it's worth taking them to the next step. And there's a few questions that I would ask myself if I was doing this. So the first question really is, how niche is your niche? What I mean by that is, are people actually involved in the hobby you're going to write about? Or do people really search for the service that you're going to promote as often as you think? Now, don't get me wrong, some people can make money in the smallest of niches, but if you're a beginner, I would say err on the side of caution and go for something with a little bit more interest in it, a little bit more popularity. So there's a technique that I learned through the Project 24 community about how to do this, and it uses a free tool called Google Trends. Now, Google Trends doesn't actually give you search volume, it just gives you an idea of how popular the search term that you put into it is over time. If you take a topic that you know got a fair bit of traffic because somebody online was talking about it and they showed you your stats, that would be a very useful term to measure your niche against. So again, turning back to Income School, we know that they had a couple of sites that did quite well. An example of that was dirtbikeplanet.com, which got around, I believe, about 100,000 page views a month at its height. Nothing to be sniffed at. So if we were to put the key term for the niche dirt biking into Google Trends, and we were also to put the key term for your niche into the trends, then we could compare them and to see how closely they match. Now, of course, this is just a guesstimation, so you've got to use a little bit of common sense here. But if you find that your niche is about the same level as dirt biking or above it, then you're pretty confident that there is a bit of search volume behind it. It's popular. People are looking for information about this niche. Now, if the trend is way below something that you know got a fair bit of traffic, like dirt biking, then it doesn't mean that it's a bad niche. It just means as a beginner, perhaps you might want to look at something else and then come back to this idea down the line. So another question that I would ask myself is whether or not this is an evergreen niche. What I mean by that is, do people search for this year round, or is it a seasonal thing, like for example skiing? And the other idea is, how quickly does your niche develop? Are you going to have to keep updating information to keep up with current trends or changes with products? If so, then it's going to be a lot more work than something where you write about it once and it is true for a long, long time. And the next couple of points I've learned from bitter experience, because although a niche might make you a lot of money, it might be very popular, it's really down to you to do the work, initially at least. So really ask yourself, how interested are you in this niche? If it's a current hobby, is it something you're likely to keep up? If it's not a hobby that you have, or it's some other sort of idea that you don't know a lot about, are you willing to learn, and do you think you can stick at it? In addition to investing your time, are you willing to invest your money into this niche? What I mean by that is, are there going to be certain products that you really have to buy in order to come across as quite authentic in the niche when you write about it, or if you're making videos about it? If you're not able to do that, it might not give you the edge. Although it's not essential always to start off by buying all the equipment that you really need. Although personally I kind of felt that with a couple of niches I've tried, I've kind of shot myself in the foot a bit because I didn't really have the resources or the opportunity to get what I needed to really come across as authentic. But there are some niches where you won't have to invest any money into it. But what you might have to do is invest time in researching. Now, this is another question. How much research are you going to have to do in order to beat the competition? Are you willing to do that? If you're not, then this is not the niche for you. So for me personally, another thing that I try to steer clear of is YMYL, your money, your life. So this really, you could argue, touches every single niche in some way, but it's really going after things like when you're giving medical advice or if you're giving financial advice. Now, it's not unheard of an amateur blogger to actually do quite well in these kind of fields. It does happen, but it involves a lot more work and the progress may be a lot slower than with another niche. So I personally don't like to touch these subjects, these niches, but if you're an expert in one of these things, you're a financial advisor, perhaps you're a doctor, then there's no problem at all. You've just got to show you've got EAT with Google. Now, as you're going through this niche filter, don't be too harsh. Just really be honest with yourself. If you're not going to go and, for example, learn how to fly an aeroplane, then probably this is not going to be the niche for you. But if you're willing to take up a new hobby, like, for example, how to plant an allotment, then push it through to the next stage. So in phase 2, I've really kind of identified 5 things that I'm thinking about. And they're not really done in a particular order, but you've got to be thinking about them all before you move on to phase 3. So first thing we're thinking about is traffic potential. Now, this isn't necessarily the queries that you're going to be writing about or the videos you're going to be making or any of that sort of thing. It's just whether or not people are actually looking for the information that would be in this niche. So the first thing really is use your common sense. If it's something that people talk about, if it's something that if you were down the pub and you were talking about this to your mates, they wouldn't be kind of like, the hell is that? And probably it's a good idea for a niche. Now, I did mention Google Trends before, but the thing is, even if we can get kind of a guesstimation of search volume, there is no way that you can get an accurate number. The only people that know about that are Google themselves. But there are a few ways you can gain insight into this, sometimes using free information and sometimes having to use paid tools. So one of the ways to kind of get an idea of the interest within a niche is actually to use YouTube. Now, YouTube's very different to using the Google SERP because you get numbers that you can see. If only we had these for the Google search, it would make our lives much easier, but then probably making this much harder as well. What I recommend you do is to search within your niche to find a couple of YouTube channels, a couple of videos on topic, and you can kind of gauge how many people are interested in that niche. Now, looking at the subscribers is a good idea to see how many people are motivated enough to click subscribe on a YouTube channel, but always make sure that that YouTube channel is within that niche completely. Now, I wouldn't look at the lifestyle type bloggers because they're kind of all over the place, unless that's the niche you're going for. And of course, with YouTube, you can also see how many views each video's got, the kind of comments that people are leaving. But if you click on the About tab on the YouTube channel itself, you can see all of the views it's got since the channel was launched. So another way to gauge interest in a niche for free is to think about magazines. Is there a magazine dedicated to your niche? Because if there is, that's probably a good sign that there's a lot of interest in that niche, because you wouldn't pay all that money to actually print out a magazine to send it to shops hoping people would buy it if they didn't do it. And of course, there are also online magazines. You can check this out. For example, with Amazon Kindle, you can get access to magazines there too. So have a look. Now, of course, the elephant in the room is using keyword research tools. Now, there are plenty out there, and for the most part, they will not give you 100% accurate data. So you don't want to believe them too much. However, they are very useful in gauging the level of search volume, the level of interest. Now, you will find a lot of the keyword research tools give a totally free trial. But what I found is that often they're really limiting you to how many searches you can make a day. I was actually looking at one today, which only gives you 5 searches daily unless you upgrade to the paid subscription. So if you really want to go down the keyword research tool path, what I would recommend is actually going for something like SEMrush or Ahrefs. Now, they do a paid trial. I think it's about $7 for each of them. Now, if you want to get your money's worth, I recommend you check out my free ebook, and there should be a link to that in the description. And what you can do is learn how to get your money's worth, every single penny's worth, out of these free paid subscriptions. You only need to do this if you're interested in seeing all of the data, because later on we're going to be talking about a method where you can use a free keyword research tool to get lots of queries and not pay a penny. So make sure you stick around for that. The other thing I'm going to consider when I'm thinking about my traffic potential is exactly where the audience is. Now, this really does matter because different countries, different audiences will give you different amount of money on ads and affiliate products. Now, everyone talks about targeting the US market because it's the best. Well, in fact, if you look at the CPM results for each country, America is only about 10th on the list. I think the UK is actually above it. But the thing is, the US has such a large population that it's really worth going for. If you were to target the country that gives you double the CPM of America, you'd probably not get a lot of traffic, and you'd have to write everything in Norwegian. Probably. If you're enjoying this video so far, don't forget to give me a like, because it helps spread the message a little bit further. So another thing to think about is what I call industry proof. One of the most daunting things for someone coming to this industry is when you think of an idea and you go and search for it and you see other people are already writing about it or making videos about it. And you think, what's the point? But actually, the fact that there are other blogs, other YouTube channels, or what have you, is actually a good thing, because it shows that people are willing to put the work in because they're getting results. So what you need to do is actually to search to see, are there other people within my industry? And a really easy way to do this is to put your industry keyword, for example, skiing, and blog, and see what comes out. If you get a couple websites and they look like they're sort of, not professional websites, they're from people kind of doing the same thing as us, that's a good thing. And the same thing for YouTube. If you write in your niche and then you go to your filters and you just select channels, you can have a look through and see, are there people in your niche? Are there people with big YouTube channels? Are they medium sized or what have you? Is there a lot of interest? Because if there is, that's a good sign, and it's probably a good niche to be in. The other thing to think about when you're looking at the results is what kind of websites are popping up. Are they blogs? Are they government websites? Are they forums? All of this information is going to help you in choosing whether or not it's a good niche to be in. Now, a lot of us would love to find a niche with zero competition and we could just exploit that and make loads and loads of money. So if you're not finding any competition within a niche, think, why is that? Why are people not spending the time to write blog posts or to make videos about it? Is it just no one knows about it, or is it people have tried and it doesn't work? It would be pretty clear if you look. So another thing that we have to do if we really want to deep dive into this niche in particular is to look at the ideation, the competition, and validation. Now, to be honest, this is going to be a huge part of picking your niche, and you may have to do this for several different niches before you land on a winner. So the first thing is called ideation. This is basically getting all the queries that you can find for your niche and just listing them out for the next stage. And there's lots of ways that you can get the queries. So the first thing is to use the classic alphabet soup method. Now, I did a video about this a little while ago, and you can check out the link here. But it's basically using the Google autocomplete and typing in a keyword, for example, skiing, and then a letter, A, B, C, and seeing what the auto suggest results are. And you're just copying all that into a Google Sheet or an Excel file for later on. In addition to this, when you get onto the SERP, you can actually look at the people also asked section, because it's going to have tons of questions that are relevant. And basically my advice would be to take all that information and chuck it into the same Google Sheet. So in addition to just using Google, there are other ways that you can get lots and lots of queries that could potentially make you a lot of money. So you can use websites like Ask the Public, Keyword Sheeter, and if you're feeling naughty, Keyword Shitter. So these websites will just kick out loads of queries, but they won't actually give you any idea of the search volume associated with them. But we can go and use a method later on to figure this out. Of course, another great way to get loads of ideas for keywords is to use a keyword research tool. As I mentioned before, I have got that free ebook which will take you through how to use things like SEMrush and Ahrefs for their paid trial and to get your money's worth. But you can of course use some free ones. So Google actually gives you their own free keyword research tool. It's called the Keyword Planner. But just be aware that the numbers they show are not really search traffic. They're to do with ads. So it's really used hand in hand with Google AdWords, but it is a great way to go through the ideation process where you come up with all of the ideas and lots of possible queries to write about. But the best one that we found really is called keywordtool.io. So this is actually a paid tool, but you can use the free trial, the free version, to get loads and loads of queries that you can put into your Google Sheets and to work with later. Now, this is especially true if you're a Project 24 member like me, because you know that there's that kind of a secret method that they talk about within Project 24 that means that you don't really need to rely on the numbers that the keyword research tools give you. You can use something else to get an idea of the potential search volume. So once you've got a lot of queries in a list, and I would recommend you try and get about 300 to start with, because you're going to whittle these down as you go. So in fact, yesterday I spent about 5 hours doing this, going through queries and doing exactly what I'm going to tell you next. Now we've got to talk about the competition now. And this is really difficult to judge if you're new to a niche. But by going through this process manually, you're going to have a much better appreciation of what's happening within your chosen niche, and it's going to become much easier as you go through the process. Literally what you want to do is to search each of the queries one after the other and see what the results are on the SERP. Now, this has always been a bit tricky for me because I live in Taiwan and I target the American audience. So one thing that you can do is you can actually change the settings within your Google browser. So if you're using Chrome, for example, you can actually change the country. But you've got to do that for every single search. So by far the better option is to use a VPN, which gives you a virtual IP to say, okay, I'm looking from the United States. Now, this gets a bit annoying because sometimes they think you're a robot, but it kind of gives you a better idea of what your user's going to see on the SERP, and that tells you who you've got to beat. When you put in your query, for example, how many puppies does a Chihuahua have? Look at the result and look at each of the 10 top results. Are they on point? Are they talking about the query that you've put in? If they are, then probably it's going to be a quite competitive topic. If they are not on point, then it might be low-hanging fruit. The next thing to do is actually to read the articles, have a look through them. Do they firstly look pleasant to look at? Does it give you kind of a nice user experience? Is it easy to find the information? Is the information detailed enough? You're basically asking yourself, is this a good resource? And if it's not, could you create a better one? To be honest, if you find that, 5 out of the 10 websites have great resources and they really explain the topic well, there's not really anything you could add, it's probably not worth your time going for that one just yet. Maybe put it on the back burner and come back to it down the way. The other thing to think about is the authority of the sites. Now, of course, there is some technical SEO to this. You thinking about the domain authority, backlink profile, all that sort of thing. Now, you don't really need to worry about that as a beginner, because the more you search, you'll start to see websites that keep popping up. That means probably within that niche, they have a lot of authority. Now, I have seen results where you get websites with very, very high domain authority being beaten out by ones with fairly mediocre levels of authority. It's because they produced a better resource and it's more on point. So don't always feel that you've got to have loads and loads of backlinks and to be, a very high domain authority website, because there is evidence to say that you can get around it. So as you're going through how competitive each of these queries are, you can put that information into your Google Sheet. And what you're developing here is a hit list for later on, a list of articles that you're going to write and exactly what you need to do in order to get them to rank. And competitiveness is, of course, very important. So you're going to go through and just put a level of how competitive that query is. If you think it's extreme because you're getting government websites, if you're getting very, very well-known websites, for example, things like Wikipedia, or you're getting, if you're in the medical field, WebMD, for example, those are going to be very high competitive queries. But if you're just getting normal blogs, probably it's about medium. If you're getting largely forums, it's probably quite low. And if nothing is on point, then it's going to be zero competition. And the next thing is perhaps the most important step, is one thing that I really missed out on the first websites that I made, which was validation. So if you're really good at this, just going through the competitive stage can actually tell you whether or not to write the thing. But I was never very good at that. So one of the great things about Project 24, the course that I follow, is they've come up with this kind of cool little way of validating every single query and not having to rely on inaccurate data from things like keyword research tools. Now, unfortunately, I can't share that method because it's not my method and they haven't spoken about it publicly yet. But what you can do is just use your common sense. Look at the query and just ask yourself, is it a common question? Would a beginner want to know about that? Or would it be more of an expert question? If it's more of a beginner question, it's probably something that you should write about. There are going to be more beginners than experts in any niche. But of course, you can rely on the figures that the keyword research tools give you if you want. But the danger there is they only give you figures for a particular query. As we know, you can phrase things in different ways. So just take it with a pinch of salt. And if there's a query which you think, yeah, a lot of people would ask that, but it's giving you a very low search volume, maybe just try it. Another little tip just for this ideation, competition and validation stage is, once you get to the end of it, don't feel afraid to go back to the start, because by the end, you're going to have a lot more knowledge to work with than when you started. You've seen a lot more of the niche, you've gone through it a lot more, and you may have made mistakes when you started. Yet another thing to think about as you're going through this entire process in phase 2 is to think about traffic source. So I mentioned in a video that I put out last week that I'm going to start a brand new open case study in blogging, so I can share everything that I do and to really help you guys learn from the mistakes that I make. One of them was not turning the air conditioning on because it's really hot in here. But when you're choosing your niche, don't fix yourself with blogging or YouTube. What you've got to do is let the traffic tell you what kind of content you need to create. So as you go through and you look at the SERP, if you're getting a lot of videos coming up for your niche, for different queries, that's probably a good sign that your audience would prefer to watch a video about something than read an article. Now, if you're not prepared to get on camera or to spend the money to get the products that are necessary to make it look good, then probably it might not be the niche for you. And the same goes for blogging. If you're looking at the results and everything is coming back in a particular style, but you would always want to write the article in a different way, it's probably telling you something there. So I actually had a little exchange with one of the viewers on this channel last week. He'd written a really good article, in my view, about a particular topic, but he was getting beaten out. He was still on page 2, although his article was about a year old. So I had a look at it and I realized that it was written really from the expert perspective. And for a beginner, because I didn't know anything about the topic, it wasn't that easy to follow. So I looked at the competition. For the most part, the competition was a step-by-step guide rather than a series of tips. So I recommended that he changed up the article just a little bit to fit in with what the user was actually searching for. Because Google doesn't randomly show websites and results. They show that because it's clear that's what the user wants to see. So perhaps one of the most important things to think about if you want to turn this into a real business is monetization. Now, I would not say that you start at this step. It's of course very important to consider how you're going to get the traffic, because it's the traffic that gives us the money. But nonetheless, one of the biggest mistakes that I made when I first launched my websites is I didn't really think about monetization, because I kind of got the idea that I was told that you could easily monetize later on. But I think it's a good idea to have a notion of how you're going to monetize before you start. The first step would be to see if other websites are making money. Now, most people won't share if they're making money or not. You can't get that information by simply searching a website. But of course, there are people that talk about it, people like me. So you could always do a bit of research into YouTubers if they're in the same niche as you and see how much money are they able to make from their websites. Another good method is to go on websites like Flipper or Empire Flippers where people sell websites, because quite often you can see what the niche is and you can see how much traffic they're getting and how much money they're making. Of course, always take this with a pinch of salt, because there are people that kind of bump up their numbers and they're not 100% truthful. So you may not want to buy a website from them, but it gives you an idea of if people are able to make money within the niche. Another thing to consider is, within your niche, are there products or services that people might need? If you're thinking of a niche where people would never have to spend any money at all, it's probably not going to generate you a lot of income. Also think, is the niche ad friendly? What I mean by that is there are certain websites, certain niches that aren't going to get on well with the ad brokers. So a good example of this is something like guns. So we all know from Income School, Jim, who did actually leave Income School a few weeks ago, he is backing the Backfire.tv website and YouTube channel. And unfortunately, he got demonetized because his subject is largely about guns. So if you're going to spend all that time and effort and then not actually get ads, you've got to have a different way of making money. So is your niche affiliate friendly? What you can do is look for a few products or your niche in general and put it into Google and put affiliate program. Do things come up? Are you able to find products to promote on affiliate networks? Things like ClickBank or perhaps on ShareASale. Is your niche good for Amazon, if nothing else? They may not pay the best commissions, but they do convert really well. Perhaps one of the biggest income earners and also the most daunting thing to do is to create an info product. Is there something that you could provide to your users that would be helpful and they would pay money for? Because if you can do that, you can make money from practically any niche at all. Finally, could you sell your website in a year or 2 years' time once you've built it up? So this is why it's always important to create a niche that anybody could take over in the future without much disturbance to your users. So phase 2 is a huge phase. There's a lot of things to consider, a lot of things to do, and you may have to do this for more than one niche idea and perhaps go back and do certain steps again and again before you're really satisfied. But do not be afraid to put the effort in now, because if you spend all your time creating posts or videos or what have you, and then later on you discover it was a bad niche, well, there's not much you can do. So once you think you found a winner, there's two things you've got to do in phase 3 before you actually start writing or producing videos. First thing you want to do is to choose your domain or the name of your YouTube channel. So there's a few things to consider when choosing your domain. The first thing I would recommend you do is to choose something short, catchy, and brandable. Now, I've had a great success in choosing kind of short domain names and what I think are fairly memorable ones. Now, if brainstorming domains is not your forte, if you don't think you can come up with something that's going to be really catchy and brandable, don't worry. You can check out the link in the description and I can actually do it for you. I run a service where I actually choose domain names for you, and I've got great success in coming up with really short ones, catchy ones. And if you're interested in that, check out that link and we can talk about it. But if you want to do it yourself, here are some tips. Make sure that you don't choose a domain with a trademark or some sort of copyright in the domain. So for example, you couldn't say thecoca-colawebsite.com. This would get you sued pretty quickly. So you can check out trademarks. If you do a quick search on Google, how to check a trademark, you can do that. Just be aware that trademarks are based on each country. So if you're targeting the USA and there's no trademark on that particular domain name, you're probably going to be okay. Just remember, Phil's not a lawyer, so do ask someone. The other thing I would say is don't put a product in your niche name. Try and keep it fairly broad. So if you want to niche up later on, you can do that. And you don't want to get stuck with, for example, a particular affiliate program and down the line, they don't exist anymore and your domain doesn't make any sense. So even if you keep your domain broad, for example, skiingexpert.com, you can also niche down within the website to begin with and cover a much smaller topic. For example, slalom skiing. I think that's a thing. Of course, always go for a .com. I've never had a problem finding a .com. People just are more used to it, even though it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really have any sort of SEO value as far as I'm aware, but it's just for the user. It's just easier to click on. Of course, you can consider if you want a brand new domain that's never been used before, whether you want to go for aged domains or look for expired domains. And if you want to know a little bit more about that, check out my other ebook, my guide in the description, where I talk about how to do all of this, and it just takes you through step by step. So before you launch your website or anything like that, really you want to come up with a content strategy. During the ideation, the competition, and the validation stage, you should have produced yourself a nice little hit list that gives you the queries that you want to target and write about. At this stage, what you're going to do is add your headings, and you're going to think about whether or not you're going to group particular keywords together in silos or do keyword clusters. It's a real strategy. As much as you can, plan out your website before you start so you know which articles are coming up, which articles will link to each other, and it's going to give you a much stronger website overall. And this is going to make it much easier for you to write because you never have to think what to write about when you sit down, and you can use your time much more wisely. Something else that I think is really important, and it's not something I've done for my other websites, but it's certainly something that I do now, is to think about a monetization strategy. Now, if you think about each of your posts or each of your videos as a line in the water, catching fish, each one of those posts or videos has a job to do. They should be able to stand alone and make you money on their own. So there are different ways to monetize. The post might just be to make ad revenue. It might be to push the user to a particular product. It may just be to push them towards a sale page for your info product. Whatever it might be, give each post a monetization strategy. You may change that over time as you gain a bit more experience and you know a little bit more about it. But don't just randomly write things. Think about it and how it all feeds back into your website and how it all works together. And another thing with your content strategy is to think about your photos. Where are you going to get your photos, your B-roll, your videos, whatever you want? Now, ideally, if you're in a niche, you should come up with your own photos if possible. And this means you could have unlimited photos to put in your posts and you wouldn't really have to pay a penny. But for most of us, when we get started, we have to rely on stock photos. So make sure you choose the platform well and have a look and see if you're going to have enough photos to use within your niche. Now, there are many different stock photo companies out there. I've actually had quite a bit of luck just using Canva Pro, although you do have to kind of change the photos a little bit before you're allowed to use them. For most of my niches, I can pretty much find what I'm looking for and supplement that with my own photos. Now, if you want to find out a little bit more about Canva Pro, you can check out the link in the description. There's actually a free 1-month trial, which should still be running right now, and you can check out the link below. So obviously, there's a lot to think about when choosing your niche, but if you think about it in a logical way and be proactive about it, you're going to find something that you're happy to write about for years to come and will make you a lot of money.